we're particularly grateful to the three of you who are here today, who are now going to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about themselves, because I think it's also important that people know who the City Matters Committee is, as well as what you do. So I'm going to start with probably the most familiar voice to the listeners of this podcast, because he is from time to time a regular on Forever Blue, and that is Matty. But rather than me introduce you, you introduce yourself, tell us your name, tell us your contact details, tell us who you represent, all the inside leg measurement if you like, whatever, but just tell us a little bit about yourself. Go.
Hello, I'm Matty Dove. Like Ian mentioned, if you listen to this podcast regularly, you might know me, you might know that I spout a lot of rubbish about Man City, you might think that I talk a lot of sense. I'll leave that up to you. I'm the under 25 rep, so I technically represent the people who are under 25 who are City fans, but I like to think that we're all in it for all City fans. So although I try and focus on issues specifically for people under 25, we're all in it together, so we want to help every type of City fan. Lifelong City fan myself, season ticket holder, been going since I was as old as I can remember, really. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Hello, I'm Colin Savage. I've been on the podcast before, of course. I think some of you may know me through King of the Kippax. I also do another well-known podcast, but I'm not going to name that and embarrass Ian.
It's not embarrassing to me. Mention anything you like.
I've got to do one later, actually. Bolt from the Blue. I do that regularly. Very enjoyable. I'm the representative for season card holders, so I've got 40,000 people that I need to keep happy. Which is an impossible job, of course, because keeping 40,000 people happy is, particularly City fans, is a very difficult job. I've been a City fan now for about 50 years, maybe a little bit more. I think my first game, if I worked it out correctly, was 50 years ago last year, 2019. So I've been going a long time, and I've also been involved in, the predecessor to City Matters was a group called Points of Blue. And also I was part of we tried to set up a supporters trust, as Ian will remember, just before the Thaksin Shinawatra takeover. So I've been sort of involved with the club quite a while, really, both as a fan and as what you might call an activist.
I'm Adam Perdue. I'm the representative for families and young children. I sit in the family stand with my daughter. She's 15. She's been going for 10 years. I started going in about 76. I think the first season I went was the one when we got pipped to the title by Liverpool. So it's bookended with this season a little bit. I've sat three sides of the ground at Main Road, and I've sat two ends of the Etihad, so I've moved about a bit. But yeah, just maybe 2 more years left in the family stand. That's it, really.
Let me ask you, all three of you can answer it either individually or collectively, however you want to do this, but why did you want to be... Well, let's start at the very beginning. What is City Matters, for those who don't know what it is?
Well, City Matters is basically a fan representative committee. We work with the senior club management on fan-related issues. So it really started moving the summer 2018, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the club asks for people to represent various, what you might call, constituencies among the City fan base. So obviously season card holders and young people and families, and we've got, there are 10 of us in total.
So you're like little MPs.
We're like, yeah. And we had to be elected. So if you wanted to represent a particular part of the fan group, you had to submit your name to the club, and the club actually had some control over it. So it's maybe a bit like the Russian elections, where they pick the candidates. But I think there were 4 of us for my category, season card holders. There were 3 or 4 candidates for most of the different posts, and people got a vote on those. So
and that went out to just any City fan, did it, or anybody in that category?
Well, I think it was any City fans.
Was anyone with a citizens membership, wasn't it? Yeah.
So do you get paid to do this job?
No, we don't get paid. It's purely voluntary. So
why do you do it?
I started doing it because I'm always moaning about the pies or the beer or whatever it is, and I'm moaning that there's never been an avenue to get into the club, or it's sometimes difficult. So they give you the chance to do it. You have to.
Yeah, I think it's just having a genuine passion for City, isn't it? I think people mistake us as sort of being puppets for the club, but we're all just football fans. We're all City fans who are just passionate about City, and having an opportunity to try and make positive change. That was the whole mindset I went into it with, is like, wow, like I'm going to feel so good if I can make positive change that makes the fans go, wow, the club are actually listening to us, and they're listening to the fans. That's what I was, because I remember in the very first meeting I was saying, I want this to be as transparent as possible, because I want fans to be able to say that the club are actually listening to the fans. And I think that's one frustration that's always been there, is that it doesn't feel like the club are listening. Before City Matters started, it always felt like we were on the outside looking in. So to have the opportunity to be in and try and help fans was just a brilliant opportunity, I think, and we're all passionate about City and we wanted to do that.
You know, we're not exclusive to the groups we cover. So I cover season card holders, but if you're an LGBT disabled over 65 season card holder who's a female, you've got quite a selection of representatives to.
You might point someone in the direction if they're better suited to handle that for you. But if a woman approaches me, I'm not going to go, oh no, sorry, I'm not a woman. I'll pass you on. So I'll try and help as much as I can. But obviously, if you feel like someone's better suited to help them, you'll say, I'll speak to someone.
The point that Matty made is we do have the different perspectives.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I think one of the great things is you do get to look at these things from a 360-degree perspective, including the clubs.
Let's get a few things straight then. When you signed up for this, did the club say to you, what happens in these meetings are confidential? You can't talk about what happens in these meetings, or are you allowed to speak freely about what happens in these meetings?
There is occasionally something that will come up and they'll go, by the way, that's not really for wider circulation. But generally speaking...
What sort of things are they then?
We can't say.
I don't mean
very clever journalism there, Ian.
I don't mean go into the details. I just mean broad strokes.
The club has given us a lot of detailed want for example, that they won't get going in the public domain. Probably best not to say, but you know, talk about the makeup of season card holders and things like. I'm just trying to think.
There's a very easy way that if that got out to the public, the media could spin that in a negative way against the club in some cases. So that's one reason.
Sorry, didn't you tell us about the season tickets that weren't being used?
That's the voice, by the way, of Will, who's in the background. Go on, what did he say
Stephen
then?
Wilberg over there. So yeah, that's an example of like...
What did Will say? Because not everybody would have heard that clearly.
He said there was a case where the club mentioned to us about the amount of season ticket holders that weren't turning up for games. And obviously, if the media get hold of that, they could spin an article on that and make us look even worse than it already does. So that there is certain specific information that they don't want getting out. But like I mentioned earlier, from the very first meeting, we were like, we want this to be as transparent as possible. We don't want it to look like we're having some little private conversation and no one's allowed to know about it. Every meeting that we have with the club gets minuted and gets published on the club website, so anyone can go and look at the minutes and see exactly what was discussed in that meeting. Obviously, there will be certain confidential information that's not allowed to go out, but for the most part, most of that conversation will go out and people can read it. They can comment. They can say, "Oh, why did this get brought up? Why didn't this get brought up?" Etc. Etc. So we want it to be as out there in the public as possible.
I think one of the things also we want to do is to have kind of more depth of coverage. So the minutes of the meetings are prepared by the club, but they're fairly bald, the minutes of the meeting. I think we doing something like this perhaps gives us the opportunity to go into more depth. And I know Kevin's been on and Matty's talked about ticket issues. It gives us the opportunity to go into a bit more depth about some of the discussions we have without giving away confidential information the club doesn't want in the public domain.
Well, we'll get into more detail of specific things in a moment or two. But how often do you meet?
Well, it was originally penciled in to be every month. In practice, it's probably every 2 months now that we have a full meeting. But in between there, we have smaller sub-meetings. So we've got various subcommittees that will look at specific issues. And basically, there's about 3 or 4 reps in each of those, and they speak for the group, really. And from that will generate agenda items that we take to the full meeting. So it's spread out a bit more than every month now.
How long do these meetings last?
They can be, well, typically they can be up to about 3 hours or so. So when we have a full meeting with the full city management team, it'll be between, say, 6 and 9 p.m. in the evenings. And occasionally it does overrun. So we can get, talking about a lot of interesting stuff, of course. But a lot of the detail work is done in the subcommittees, so the working groups. So we've got one covering ticketing specifically. There's one covering catering, which is a subject of interest to a lot of people. One which we call the atmosphere subgroup, but that I think we're talking about making that more of a match day thing. And there's one on equality and diversity, which you think would be a fairly simple subject, but I think we had one of our more interesting meetings on the subject of equality and diversity. It's fair to say. So we'll talk about a lot of the detailed stuff in the subcommittee meetings. In the main meeting, we'll have a reps meeting as well every few weeks where we talk amongst ourselves and we'll decide on stuff we want to bring up to the club. Generally at the full meetings, we'll have a couple of big agenda items. There might be something big that we want to bring up. There might be something the club wants to bring up. So it might be talking about the expansion of the North Stand, for example, which has been talked about. Or one of the subjects recently was some of the small technology startups that they're working with as part of a venture fund they set up called Sapphire something. I never remember. Sapphire Ventures, I think it's called. That's a $100 million fund which the club put money into, and they're working with small tech startups to try and scale up these things to make the matchday experience better in some way. So we can talk quite a lot of. We can get through. It's not just one meeting every 6 weeks, 2 months. There might be 3 or 4 meetings in that cycle.
So when you say senior management are there, who are we talking about? Whether you want to give us names or you want to just give us roles and the numbers of people that might be there. So in other words, from a fan's perspective who's listening to this now, who's actually listening to this meeting, who's involved in it, and who's there from the club?
So it's meaningful people from the club. It's Omar Barada, the COO, is there. Danny Wilson, who's the Director of Operations, is there. Lisa Eaton is sometimes there, the Support Services Head. And then there's Elliot, the PR, Head of PR.
Andrew Gilligan, who's Director of Research and Insight, which may surprise people. We have someone who's Director of Research and Insight. It probably wouldn't have happened in Peter Swales' day, but there's a very slick operation behind the club these days, and I think and occasionally we get people in on a specific topic. So we've had Andrew Taylor, who's the food and beverage head, Clive, is it Wilton?
Wilton,
yeah, who's involved in sustainability. We've had Carolyn McBride, who's the Group HR Director. And certainly one of my first question when I was approached about doing this was, who is doing this for the club? Because if it wasn't someone senior, then I would have said no. But the fact Omar Barada runs the club, and people not particularly familiar with Omar, they know Ferran Soriano, Chigi Bagheeristan, and of course our chairman, Kaldwin Al-Mubarak, better. But Omar Barada is the man who runs City on a day-to-day basis.
Is his role Chief Operating Officer?
Chief Operating Officer, that's correct, yeah.
So you're looking at, originally Chris Bird was he the first one of those?
Chris Bird and Alistair McIntosh, I think, were joint chief executives or managing directors, which didn't work very well. And
okay.
That was the whole time around David Bernstein, wasn't it? And
now here's a much more subjective question, which is at the core of all this, and which I'll go into more detail in a minute from questions from people, but it is a general overview thing that a lot of people keep saying to me when they message me. Is this just tokenism from the club? Does the club do this just so that they can then push through decisions that they want and then blame you people? And so it's just a bit of tokenism.
Well, to give a little bit of background very quickly, all clubs are required by Premier League rules to have structured engagement with the fans, and also there's a group in Parliament, in the House of Commons, called the Football Expert Working Group, and they've also made it virtually mandatory for clubs to have what they call structured formal engagement with their fans. So all clubs now have some sort of committee to some degree or other, similar committee or similar way of communicating with the fans. Now, so to go back to my original question to the club was, who's running this on from the club's point of view? Because I was worried that it would be a little bit of a box-ticking exercise. I think we're all satisfied that it's not tokenism. We do have some very robust discussions with the club. We're not nodding dogs. We're not sitting there saying, yes, you can do that. There are issues we have with the club. There are arguments we have with them. There are disagreements. There are things which we suggest that they take on board.